Welcome back to the woods. Find a quiet place, maybe a cup of tea or something warm, and let's step together into a slower world, where the days pass gently and small creatures live simple, beautiful lives beneath the trees. Morning light spilled over the treetops, soft and golden, filtering through the mist that still clung to the hollows of the forest. The first birds had already begun to sing, those thin, silvery calls that sound almost like laughter if you listen closely enough. The badger stirred before anyone else. His burrow was cool and damp, the kind of place that still smelled faintly of earth and winter moss. But outside, he could feel warmth returning to the soil. He stretched, blinked against the brightness, and took in the smell of damp bark and thawed leaves. Today, he decided, would be a day for repairing things. The little wooden bridge that crossed the creek below his home had been damaged by frost. He'd been meaning to fix it for days, but every time he brought it up, the squirrel found a reason to chase after something else. Acorns, twigs, or imagined noises in the canopy. But today, the badger thought would be different. He filled a small pack with tools, a hatchet, a coil of rope, a hammer, and a tin of oil. Before setting off, he stopped to gather some breakfast, 2 slices of seed loaf, a piece of cheese, and a flask of tea. The forest was just waking as he set down the path toward the creek, his heavy steps making soft prints in the damp ground. By the time he reached the water, the squirrel was already there, balancing precariously on one of the broken planks. "Careful," the badger called. The squirrel turned, startled, nearly losing his footing before hopping back to shore. "I was just checking to see how bad it was," he said defensively. The badger set down his pack and knelt beside the bridge. The frost had splintered 3 boards clean through, and the middle post had shifted slightly where the current had swollen against it. "It's not too bad," he said after a moment. "We'll need to brace the center and replace the planks." "Easy enough." The squirrel peered into the rushing water below. "You say easy, but I can't even tell what's holding it up." The badger chuckled. "Good craftsmanship, that's what." The hedgehog appeared a few moments later, bundled in a scarf almost as big as himself. "I brought biscuits," he said, holding up a small tin. "For breaks." The squirrel grinned. "Ah, so you came prepared." The hedgehog blinked. "Well, I didn't come to work." The badger laughed, shaking his head. "You can supervise, then." The morning passed quietly. The air was cool and smelled of pine sap and whetstone. They worked together with an easy rhythm, the badger driving in nails, the squirrel fetching rope, and the hedgehog sitting nearby with a biscuit in paw, offering occasional commentary like, "That one's crooked," or "You're dripping mud everywhere." After an hour, the sound of footsteps approached along the path. The fox appeared, carrying a basket balanced against his shoulder. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, setting it down. Inside were roasted chestnuts, sliced apples, and a jar of honey. The squirrel immediately dropped his hammer. "Now that's the kind of repair work I can get behind." They took their break on the grassy bank, the sun now warming the tops of the reeds. The fox poured honey over the chestnuts, and they ate slowly, listening to the river babble against the rocks. The badger sipped his tea. "Funny, isn't it?" he said after a while. "We work so hard on things that the forest would mend on its own eventually." The fox smiled. "Maybe, but then we wouldn't have an excuse to sit by the water like this." The hedgehog nodded solemnly. "That's true. Some things are worth fixing just to make a good day of it." When they finished, the badger stood and dusted off his paws. "Right, back to work. We'll have this bridge steady before evening." The squirrel groaned, but he followed. Together, they lifted the new planks into place. The sound of hammering echoed softly between the trees, mingling with birdsong and the rustle of leaves. As the light began to fade, the last board was set. The bridge stood firm and level, its new wood glowing pale in the late sun. They crossed one by one, testing it. It creaked but held strong. The fox lingered in the middle, looking down at the clear water below. "You can see straight to the bottom," he said quietly. Look, there's a fish hiding under the stones. The hedgehog leaned over the railing. Maybe we should name the bridge. The squirrel laughed. Name it? It's just a bridge. Still, the badger said, thoughtful. He might be right. Things you care for should have names. The fox nodded. Then let's call it Minwell Bridge. For all the things we fix and all the ones we're still learning to. The name settled into the quiet like a small truth. That night, they stayed a little longer than usual. The moon rose early, silvering the river and the tops of the ferns. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke from the badger's pipe. The hedgehog dozed against a root. The squirrel dangled his tail off the edge of the bridge, and the fox stared up at the stars, thoughtful and still. The badger, watching them all, smiled to himself. Tomorrow, he said softly, we'll build a bench here, somewhere to sit and watch the water. The squirrel murmured drowsily, and eat biscuits. The badger chuckled. Yes, and eat biscuits. The fox closed his eyes. Then it settled. Mindwell Bridge will always have company. The night deepened. The forest hummed around them, and the soft rush of the river became a lullaby, a promise that tomorrow would come just as gently as today had gone. The storm arrived 2 nights later. It began quietly, a whispering wind through the canopy, a distant rumble over the hills, and by midnight, the forest was alive with sound. Rain hammered the leaves, thunder rolled like stones tumbling down a mountain, and the creek by Mindwell Bridge swelled into a small, roaring river. The badger lay awake, listening. Every crack of thunder made the timbers of his burrow tremble. He could hear the rainwater trickling down the walls, the steady drip into a bucket near the door. Sleep would not come. By dawn, the storm had passed, leaving behind a pale, washed-out light and the smell of soaked moss. Mist hung low between the trees. The badger pulled on his coat and trudged toward the bridge, his paws sinking into soft mud. When he arrived, he stopped short. Mindwell Bridge still stood. The structure held firm, just as he had built it. But beneath it, the river had torn loose branches and leaves from upstream, wedging them in a tangled heap against the supports. Among the debris was something unusual, a small, carved box, half buried in the reeds. The badger leaned down, water lapping at his boots, and carefully pulled it free. It was smooth and dark, carved from walnut, the surface etched with delicate patterns of leaves and vines. A clasp of tarnished brass kept it shut. He turned it over in his paws. "Well now," he murmured, "what's this doing here?" By the time he made it back to the hut, the others were already awake. The squirrel was drying his tail by the fire, complaining loudly about the rain. The hedgehog was trying to make tea, but kept spilling the water, and the fox sat at the table, calmly slicing apples into a tin plate. The badger set the box down before them. "What have you got there?" asked the squirrel, immediately leaning closer. "Found it caught beneath the bridge," said the badger. "Looks old. The storm must have carried it from somewhere upstream." The fox peered at the carving. "That's fine work," he said. "Whoever made it knew what they were doing." "Let's open it," said the squirrel. The hedgehog frowned. "Careful. Could be something delicate inside." The badger tested the clasp. It creaked but came loose. Slowly, he lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in a square of oilcloth, were several small items. A compass, its glass cracked, but the needles still quivering faintly. A roll of parchment tied with twine. And a silver button, tarnished but shining faintly where the light struck it. The fox picked up the compass. "This isn't forest-made," he said softly. "See the engraving? This came from the river folk, at least." The squirrel tilted his head. "River folk. They live further down the valley," the fox explained. "Beyond the willow flats. Boat builders, mostly. Traders. Haven't seen any this far upstream in a long time." The badger untied the parchment and spread it on the table. It was a map, hand-drawn, creased, and water-stained, but clear enough to read. It showed the river's curve, several landmarks marked in small, neat letters, and at the top corner, in faded ink, the word home. The hedgehog leaned over it, eyes wide. Do you think someone lost this in the storm? The fox nodded slowly, or someone was trying to send it. They sat in silence for a while, the fire crackling softly. Rain still dripped from the eaves outside, each drop making a small, steady sound against the window ledge. At last, the badger said, "We should take it back. Whoever lost it might need it." The squirrel's ears perked. "You mean a trip? Down the river?" The badger smiled faintly. "It's been a while since we had a proper walk. The weather's warming, and the forest paths will dry soon enough. Might do us some good." The fox ran a paw along the map, tracing the river's path. "It's not far, maybe a day's walk if we follow the water. I know the way." The hedgehog sipped his tea. "And if no one claims it, then," said the badger, "we'll keep it safe. Maybe the forest meant for us to find it." 2 mornings later, they set out. The mist still clung to the ground, curling around their ankles as they walked. The squirrel darted ahead, leaping from root to root. The fox moved gracefully behind, the map tucked into his satchel. The hedgehog trudged in the middle, puffing slightly but content. And the badger brought up the rear, steady and sure, carrying the small carved box under his arm. The forest changed as they moved downstream. The trees grew taller and closer together, the air heavy with the scent of wet bark and fern. The sound of the river was constant, a living thing that whispered and rushed beside them. By noon, they stopped on a flat rock beside the water to eat. The squirrel had packed dried berries, the hedgehog brought seed cakes, and the fox had tucked away a jar of thick plum jam. The badger, ever practical, brewed tea over a small fire using his tin kettle. They ate quietly, listening to the wind ripple through the reeds. "Do you ever think," the hedgehog asked suddenly, "that maybe the forest sends things to us? Not just weather or seasons, but things like this box, like small reminders." The squirrel laughed softly. "Reminders of what?" "Of how far we've come," said the fox before the hedgehog could answer. "Of who we still are." The badger poured more tea, the steam rising in slow curls. "Then maybe this is one of those reminders." The squirrel's tone softened. "I hope it's a good one." They reached the willow flats by late afternoon. The trees here grew long and drooping, their branches trailing in the water. The river widened, slowing into a smooth, steady current. Sunlight danced across its surface, and dragonflies drifted lazily from reed to reed. Nestled among the roots of the biggest willow was a small jetty, weathered but sturdy, and beside it, a cabin half hidden by vines. Smoke curled faintly from its chimney. "Looks like someone's home," murmured the fox. The badger nodded. "Let's see if they've lost something." They approached slowly, paws soft on the wooden planks. From inside came the faint sound of humming. When they knocked, a voice called, "Come in." The door creaked open, and they stepped into a warm, tidy room filled with the smell of baked apples and pine resin. An otter stood by the hearth, wiping her paws on a cloth. "Well now," she said, surprised but smiling. "Visitors, what brings you all the way down from the ridge?" The badger held out the small wooden box. "We found this after the storm. Thought it might belong to someone here." The otter's eyes widened. She took it carefully, running her paw over the carvings. "Oh, this was my brother's," she whispered. "He traveled north months ago and never came back. I thought it was lost forever." She opened it slowly, her eyes softening as she saw the compass and the button. "He used to wear this," she said, touching the silver piece. "It must have washed downstream when she didn't finish." The room was quiet except for the gentle crackle of the fire. The fox spoke softly. "We're sorry, but it's found its way home." The otter nodded, smiling faintly through her tears. "Thank you. You've done more kindness than you know." She insisted they stay for supper. By the time the lamps were lit, her kitchen was full of warmth and good smells, fresh bread, roasted roots, and a pot of river fish stew simmering over the fire. They ate together, talking quietly as the evening deepened outside. When they finally left, the moon had risen high, silvering the water once again. The otter stood by the door, the box clutched to her chest. "Safe travels, friends," she said. "And thank you." The badger tipped his hat. "Keep the river company for us." They walked home along the moonlit bank, the night alive with crickets and frogs. The bridge would be waiting for them, strong and steady, just as they'd built it. As they passed beneath the tall pines, the squirrel looked up at the stars. "Funny," he said, "how something can be lost for so long and still find its way back." The fox smiled. "The forest remembers. Always." And beside him, the badger nodded, the sound of the river following them like a heartbeat all the way home. The forest woke gently in the weeks that followed. Spring unfurled in slow, patient ripples, snowmelt trickling down from the higher ridges, buds swelling on the alders, and the air filling once again with the soft murmur of bees. The days stretched longer, the nights grew warmer, and Mindwell Bridge, once battered by the storm, stood clean and strong beneath a fresh coat of moss and morning light. The badger was up early most days, tending to the small repairs that nature always required after winter. The path leading to the bridge needed clearing, the creek banks needed shoring, and the flower beds outside the hut had already begun to bloom with bright whitewood anemones. But one task, long promised, still waited: the bench. He'd mentioned it before the storm, a place to sit beside the bridge, where travelers might rest and watch the water flow. But time and weather had delayed it. Now, with the forest breathing again and his friends eager to help, the idea returned like a warm, familiar thought. One morning, after breakfast, the badger gathered his companions. "The bridge stands strong," he said, tightening his apron, "but it could use a bit of company. I was thinking a bench, just here by the birch tree." The squirrel's ears twitched. "A bench? Somewhere to sit and snack, you mean?" The hedgehog smiled sleepily. "Or nap." The fox, ever thoughtful, nodded. "It's a fine idea. The river's quieter now. Would make a good place to listen to it." The badger chuckled. "Then it's settled. We'll build it this week." The next few days passed in the gentle rhythm of work and conversation. The fox measured the wood, sturdy planks of oak from a fallen tree upriver. The squirrel fetched nails and sanded the rough edges smooth with bits of stone. The hedgehog, patient and meticulous, rubbed oil into the grain to bring out its color, while the badger handled the carving, shaping the legs and backrest with slow, sure movements of his chisel. The bench began to take form, simple, solid, yet graceful in its way. On the backrest, the badger carved a single design: a flowing river winding beneath an arch, a quiet tribute to the bridge itself. They worked mostly in the mornings, when the air was cool and the light dappled through the leaves. By afternoon, they'd rest in the shade, sipping tea or watching dragonflies skim the water. Sometimes the squirrel would chatter about faraway places he'd never actually seen. Sometimes the fox told short, quiet stories about his youth in the valley. And sometimes they simply sat together without speaking, listening to the hum of the forest. On the fifth day, the bench was finished. They carried it together down the soft moss path, across the clearing, and up to the foot of Mindwell Bridge. The air smelled of rain and pine needles, and the sun broke through the canopy just as they set it in place. It fit perfectly, facing the river, framed by the birch tree and the steady curve of the bridge's stone. The badger ran his paw along the wood, feeling its warmth. "There," he said softly. "Not too grand, not too plain." The hedgehog sat first, sighing contentedly. "It's perfect," he murmured. The squirrel hopped up beside him, tail flicking. "Imagine all the stories that'll be told here. Travelers, wanderers, maybe even the river folk again." The fox smiled faintly. "If they find their way this far once more." The badger leaned against the birch, gazing at the water. The river ran smooth and silver now, its surface dotted with sunlight. "They will," he said quietly. "In time, everything finds its way." That evening, after supper, the four friends returned to the bench to watch the sunset. The forest glowed golden green, the light pooling in the leaves like honey. Birds sang their slow, fading songs. Somewhere upstream, a heron cried, long and low. The fox brought a small lantern and hung it on a hook by the bridge. The squirrel produced a pouch of roasted chestnuts. The hedgehog carried a blanket. And the badger brought his sketchbook, one he rarely showed anyone. They sat together as the sun sank lower, talking softly about small things, what to plant in the garden, whether the otter might visit again, and how early the stars seemed to come out that year. When the sky deepened to indigo, the badger flipped open his sketchbook. On one page, he'd drawn the bridge as it looked that morning, stone and wood, light and shadow, and the new bench beneath the birch. The others leaned close to see. "You're getting good," said the fox with a smile. The badger shrugged, a little embarrassed. "Helps me remember." The squirrel nudged him playfully. "Then you'd better draw us on it too, or the memory won't be complete." The hedgehog chuckled. "Yes, put me right here with a cup of tea." The badger grinned, pencil already moving. "All right then, hold still." As night settled, the forest came alive with quiet sounds. Crickets, frogs, the whisper of leaves. The moon rose, round and pale, casting silver reflections across the river. The four friends sat in contented silence. The bridge, the bench, the birch, all stood together, part of something steady and lasting. And when the wind moved through the trees, it carried with it a faint, rippling whisper, as though the river itself was speaking, not in words, but in the calm assurance of belonging. In the weeks to come, others began to visit. A family of field mice came to rest there during their evening walks. A heron often landed nearby, standing silent in the shallows. Even the otter from the willow flats made the journey upstream once, bringing a basket of pears as thanks. The bench became a quiet meeting place for stories, for tea, for simply watching the river move. One morning, the badger carved a small inscription along its back, just beneath the river design. "For all who pause and listen." The fox smiled when he saw it. "Simple," he said, "but true." The badger nodded. "That's all it needs to be." And so, life at Mendwell Bridge continued, slower perhaps, but fuller in small ways. The seasons turned, the forest breathed, and the friends found joy in the quiet rhythm of each passing day. Sometimes the badger would catch himself gazing at the bench from across the water, sunlight on the wood, a squirrel perched upon it, or a hedgehog asleep beneath its shade, and he'd think how much like the bridge it was, built to last, made for others to rest upon, and standing firm against whatever storms might come. The river flowed on, as rivers always do, and the bench at Mendwell Bridge became part of the forest's story, not for its grandeur, but for its quiet kindness and for the friends who built it together. Would you like me to start the next story in the same tone? Perhaps one set in midsummer, when a wandering painter arrives in the forest and changes the rhythm of their quiet lives for a while. By midsummer, the forest was alive with sound and light. The air hummed with the low music of bees, and the paths were warm underfoot, dusted in golden pollen. Ferns unfurled like green sails along the creek banks, and Mendwell Bridge was now nearly hidden behind a curtain of willow leaves that trailed into the water. Life had settled into a peaceful rhythm for the four friends. The fox took to writing in the mornings, perched on the bench with his quill and a pot of ink balanced carefully beside him. The squirrel gathered berries and nuts to trade with the mice in the next valley. The hedgehog, ever the tinkerer, built small wind chimes out of river stones and reeds that now hung from the eaves of the hut, singing softly whenever the wind passed through. And the badger? He had started to draw again. Not just sketches in his book, but real, detailed pieces of the bridge, the forest paths, even his friends caught mid-laughter or mid-thought. His paws, once rough from carpentry, had grown more patient, his lines steadier, his eyes sharper. He'd begun to think of showing them to someone someday, but that thought stayed quiet, tucked somewhere deep, until the afternoon the stranger arrived. It was a Tuesday, warm and windless. The light seemed to stand still on the water. The fox was dozing on the bench when he heard footsteps on the bridge, slow, deliberate, and unfamiliar. He sat up, blinking against the sun. A tall, thin figure appeared, carrying a large satchel over one shoulder and a rolled canvas under one arm. His coat was linen, his boots dusty, his hat broad and worn at the edges. His fur, a soft shade between chestnut and gold, caught the light as he paused halfway across the bridge and looked down at the river. The fox tilted his head. "Afternoon, traveler." The stranger turned, smiled faintly, and tipped his hat. "Afternoon. Fine bridge you've got here." The fox nodded, pride flickering in his eyes. "Built it ourselves." "Well, mostly the badger. We just handed him tools and moral support." A chuckle. "That's worth more than you'd think." The fox stood. "You're welcome to rest, if you like. There's tea and shade just there." The stranger's eyes followed his paw toward the bench and the hut beyond, half hidden in the trees. "I think I'll take you up on that." By the time they reached the clearing, the others had noticed. The hedgehog peeked from the hut door, wiping his paws on a cloth. The squirrel perched in a nearby branch, curiosity gleaming. And the badger stepped forward, friendly but cautious. The stranger introduced himself as Marlin, a painter from the southern hills, traveling north to find the quiet places the maps forget. When he unrolled his canvas, the friends gasped softly. It was a landscape, a valley, not unlike their own, bathed in morning light. The brushwork was loose but alive, every leaf shimmering, every shadow breathing. There was warmth in it, but also stillness, as if time itself had slowed. The badger leaned closer. "You painted this from memory?" Marlin smiled. "From feeling mostly." That night, they offered him soup and a bed in the loft. He spoke little about himself, but asked much about them. The bridge, the storms, the winters, the river. He listened with a kind of patient attention that made even the simplest stories feel important. Before he went to sleep, he looked out at the moonlit bench and said softly, "This place has a soul." The badger, standing in the doorway, felt something stir in his chest. The days that followed unfolded like a slow, beautiful melody. Marlin set up his easel near the birch, where he could see both the bridge and the water. Every morning he painted, his brush dancing over the canvas in swift, confident strokes. He spoke little as he worked, but when the friends gathered nearby. Sipping tea, talking softly, he'd glance up now and then, smile, and returned his colors. Sometimes he'd ask the badger to pose for a moment, or the fox to hold still as the light caught his fur. Other times, he painted the world without them. Just the forest, the water, and the shimmering hush that held everything together. The badger found himself watching often, not the painting, but the act of painting. The way Marlin seemed to see through things, beyond bark, stone, and fur, into what they meant. It was like watching someone translate silence into color. One afternoon, while the painter washed his brushes in the river, the badger approached him quietly. "You see things the rest of us miss," he said. Marlin smiled without looking up. "So do you? You build a bridge where most would have built a fence." The badger hesitated. "You think the two are so different?" "They are," Marlin said softly. "A fence keeps the world out. A bridge lets it in." The badger thought about that long after Marlin went back to painting. As summer deepened, the painter's canvas began to fill. It wasn't just a picture of the bridge or the bench. It was a portrait of everything. The friends, the water, the way the light filtered through the leaves. The colors seemed to hum with life. When it was finally done, he didn't announce it. He simply carried it to the clearing one evening, leaned it against the birch, and said, "It's finished." They gathered around quietly. On the canvas, Mendwell Bridge arched over the silver-blue river. The bench rested beneath the birch, bathed in soft gold light. And seated on it were 4 figures: the fox, the squirrel, the hedgehog, and the badger, caught in a moment of laughter, their faces lit by the last warmth of day. The badger's throat tightened. "You painted us." Marlin nodded. "I painted what I saw." The fox smiled. "It's beautiful." The painter tilted his head slightly. "Then it's yours." They protested, of course, but he refused payment, saying only that the forest had already given him more than coin ever could. That night, they hung the painting in the hut, above the table where they took their meals. It became a kind of quiet heart, the thing they gathered beneath each evening, the image that reminded them of what they'd built together. A few days later, when Marlin packed his satchel to continue north, the friends walked him to the bridge. "Will you come back?" asked the squirrel. The painter smiled faintly. "Maybe, but even if I don't, I'll still carry this place with me." The badger clasped his paw. "You've left more here than you've taken." Marlin nodded. "That's how it should be." He crossed the bridge slowly, disappearing into the tall grass on the far side. For a long while, they stood there, listening to the sound of the river. Summer waned into autumn. The leaves turned amber and red, the air cool and sharp. The bench by the birch remained where it was, catching the last rays of evening sun. The painting stayed in the hut, gathering the faint smell of smoke and pine. And sometimes on quiet nights, the badger would light a candle and sit before it, studying the way the colors seemed to move, the laughter frozen forever in that warm, golden moment. He realized then that art and bridges shared the same purpose. Both were ways of connecting things that might otherwise remain apart. By the time frost began to feather the edges of the windows again, the forest had quieted into that solemn rhythm winter always brings. The days were short, and the river no longer sang. It murmured, soft and muted beneath its new glass skin. Snow came early that year, and by the third week of December, the little clearing by Mendwell Bridge looked like something from a dream. The hut was warm, though. Inside, the fire popped inside, and the smell of pine sap hung in the air. The friends had grown accustomed to these evenings. The fox at a small desk, writing letters to no one in particular. The hedgehog tinkering with a half-finished contraption that clinked every now and then, and the squirrel toasting acorns by the fire while humming something soft and tuneless. The badger sat near the window, sketchbook on his knees, though he wasn't drawing much that night. His eyes kept drifting toward the painting above the table, the one Marlin had left them. It seemed somehow warmer than the room itself, as though it glowed faintly even in the low light. He stared at it for a long time, thinking how strange it was that something made from color and cloth could feel so alive. Then came the knock. It wasn't loud. 3 slow taps against the wood. They all turned at once. Visitors in the dead of winter were rare. The fox rose, went to the door, and opened it. There stood the post mouse, bundled in a scarf twice her size, whiskers dusted with snow. "Evening," she squeaked, stamping her tiny boots. "Message from the southern hills. Took me 4 days to get here, and that's counting a night in a hollow log." The fox's eyebrows lifted. "Southern hills." She nodded, rummaged in her satchel, and pulled out a thick envelope sealed with a dark blue mark, addressed to the friends of Mendwell Bridge. "That'd be you lot, wouldn't it?" The badger's heart gave a small leap. "It must be Marlin." The mouse grinned. "If it is, tell him to stop using wax seals. Nearly froze my paws clean off carrying that thing." They thanked her, gave her a cup of broth and a bit of honey bread, and sent her on her way before the snow thickened again. Then, with quiet ceremony, the badger slit the envelope open. Inside was a single folded letter and a smaller piece of parchment tucked within. The badger read aloud, his voice low and steady. "My friends, the hills have been kind to me. The air here carries the scent of cedar, and the rivers are slow but clear. Yet though I paint and travel and see new skies each week, I find my thoughts drifting back to the bridge, the birch, and the 4 faces that taught me what quiet truly means. I've sent you something I painted since leaving. It's not the same as being there, but perhaps it will remind you that our moments remain alive, even when we part. I hope the winter has been gentle and the river kind. I will come by again when the thaw begins. Until then, keep the fire bright. Marlin. The badger unfolded the smaller piece of parchment and held it up to the light. It was a painting, small but delicate and detailed. It showed their hut under snow, smoke curling gently from the chimney, the light within casting a golden glow across the drifts. But what caught the most was the window. Inside, painted in fine, soft lines, were four figures seated together. The same warmth and laughter that filled the larger painting, now reflected in winter's quiet hush. No one spoke for a while. The hedgehog sniffed softly, pretending to busy himself with the kettle. The squirrel leaned closer, tracing the edge of the paper with one paw. He remembered, she said. The badger nodded. He never forgets. They framed the little painting and hung it beside the first, where the candlelight touched them both. 2 seasons side by side, summer and winter, laughter and calm, color and snow. It felt like something complete. Winter deepened. The days shrank to pale silver, and frost crept across the beams of the hut each morning. But there was peace in it. The friends had fallen into an easy rhythm, the kind that didn't need words to feel right. Sometimes they'd sit by the fire in silence, listening to the wind slip through the pines. Other nights, the fox would read aloud from his notebook, stories that weren't really about anything but always ended in warmth. A walk home, a shared meal, a light left burning. The badger's sketches grew fuller, more confident. The squirrel began carving tiny wooden ornaments shaped like leaves and stars. The hedgehog perfected a clever little lantern that ran on a few drops of nut oil and gave off the softest golden glow. They hung it by the window, and its light flickered just beneath the painting, as though the art itself breathed. One evening, while snow fell thick as feathers, the badger stepped outside. The world was utterly still. No birds, no rustle, only the faint crackle of frost. He looked out toward the bridge, half buried now, its rails draped in white. Beyond it, the river was frozen nearly solid, save for a narrow channel where water whispered beneath the ice. He could almost see Marlin there, his easel by the bank, brush moving gently, breath clouding in the cold. The badger smiled to himself, tucking his paws into his coat. Behind him, the door opened and the fox called out, "You'll freeze if you keep staring like that." "Just a moment," the badger replied. He stayed until his breath came in misty plumes, watching the faint shimmer of moonlight on the river. Then he turned back toward the glow of the hut, his home, his friends, and the 2 paintings that told their story better than words ever could. Spring came softly, as it always did. The snow melted, the bridge reemerged, and the first shoots of green poked through the thawing soil. The badger rose early one morning to fetch water from the stream and stopped halfway down the path. There, resting on the bench beneath the birch, was another envelope. No footprints led to it, only the faint trace of where snow had fallen away. He smiled, shaking his head. When he brought it inside, they gathered around. It contained a short note, barely more than a few lines. "For the friends who keep the fire burning. I never did learn to paint frost the way you live it. M." Tucked behind it was a small watercolor. This one not of the hut, nor of the bridge, but of the bench itself in early dawn. A cup of tea sat upon it, steam curling up into the pale light. A robin perched on the backrest. It was somehow perfect. That evening, they hung the 3rd painting between the other 2. The summer, the winter, and now the dawn between them. And as the day faded and the air grew cool again, the fox poured tea for them all and said softly, "You know, it feels like he's still here." The badger smiled. "He is. Every color he left is part of this place now." They sat long into the night, the paintings gleaming faintly in the firelight, while the forest outside breathed with slow, content rhythm. Each creak, each sigh of wind through branches, a quiet chorus of connection that asked for nothing more. Thank you for wandering through the woods with me. If you'd like to return for more quiet stories and soft moments, don't forget to follow the trail back. Like, subscribe, and I'll meet you again under the green canopy soon.